guess I'll just start. Huh? Hi there. Happy Saturday, day of Saturn. All right. So normally I do these live streams, or plan to do these live streams on Sundays in the afternoon, usually maybe 2 hours earlier than now, 2 or 3 hours earlier. 1 p.m. I think on Sundays, Eastern Central Time or Eastern Time. But I have something coming up possibly tomorrow, so I needed to do it today instead. Plus, I wanted to see if maybe there's more activity on Saturdays. I don't know. But I'll probably go back to Sundays next week. But this would be my second live stream research study hall session. I have a few errands, a few things I need to do. And so these sessions, it's like an open Q&A. If I have any active questions from other videos that I put out, I might answer those. I usually answer every question within the comment section of my videos too, just so people watching those videos can see those as well. I might go through a few of those questions if the people who asked those questions maybe came in today. I don't think they will this particular time, but if you have any questions, it's an open forum, so any questions about anything mythology or even anthropology related, I can take those right here. But in line with the last research session, I have kind of a wiki here. Wikipedia's, I do a lot of research on my own. That doesn't mean I'm always using Wikipedia. A lot of the research I do would be kind of difficult to show off in any kind of visual way on one screen. I have multiple monitors, right? But when I do a live screen, I have to monitor quite a few things at once. So yeah, it's not like I'm going to use a really super deep intensive source. If there's a particular maybe article or something else that I want to look into, I can open it up on here so that you guys can see it. Otherwise, I have another monitor to my right that is going to have a few other research items. A few other things to note on how I do my research. Now, I'm a polymath. I'm multidisciplinary. My background is in geography and sociology, and geography is actually, it's broader, it's geoscience, so anthropology, geology. I'm very interdisciplinary in even in my academic practice, but more so I kind of range from all over the place. So yeah, I have a project I've been working on. Last week I was talking about Etruscan mythology, and I know I had a question coming in about, we ultimately talked about this liver bronze item. I'm not going to be necessarily talking about that today. Today I've been doing a project here of trying to map out, and this is a long-term project, but I'm trying to map out the different ethnolinguistic groups' evolution throughout time, and that ultimately relates to the mythopoetic groups, I would say. And a lot of my research I do, if you can see on the left side here in my Obsidian database, they're all categorized into these kind of ethnolinguistic groups. So there's a lot of overlap between linguistics, anthropology, archaeology, history, geography, and mythology. Like, it all kind of comes together. It's not possible to separate them very much. So this is how I organize it in here, and now I'm trying to have kind of a counterpart organization in this map, and eventually I'm going to make an animation that's a GIF of all the different eras, kind of looking at them. I have my face in inconvenient place when it comes to looking at this particular article, so I'm going to throw myself over here and see if that maybe helps. But as you can kind of see in the lower right corner here, I have a timeline, and right here we're at 11,000 BC. I just started working on it a few weeks ago, so there are a few different eras in here. These are like really Paleolithic. So look, I have some Paleolithic groups in here that I'm trying to work through. Mousterians, that's a group of Neanderthals actually. So yeah, today I wanted to rein in a little closer to the Neolithic. So 11,000 BC is when the Neolithic is beginning in a lot of different places. Some of those being over here, or the West Asian Neolithic as it's called, which is the Natufians. They were some of the first farmers, agriculturalists, around 13,000 BC. Then over here we have actually the East Asian Neolithic, which is rice cultivation. It actually began around the Yangtze Valley in the upper Yangtze right here by returning them the Yangtzeans, and they might relate back to Proto-Hmong and Mian languages. They kind of come back into a prototype. So there's kind of the linguistic term I have under, and then on the top is kind of a popular, easy to remember idea. One example of that is like right here, Proto-Kra-Dai, which is Thai, the Thai languages, and Kra and all these other languages are related. Kra-Daian is something I just made up just to make it look more memorable. And then the linguistic group is kind of under there. But, there's a lot of research that's showing that the Thai languages are the closest ancestor to Austronesian languages, which would be the languages of of original Taiwan, Aboriginal Taiwanese, the Philippines and Indonesia, and including the Polynesians and the Hawaiians ultimately, and so on. Even the Malagasy who lived in Madagascar, they went all the way over here eventually. But right here in 11,000 BC, we have evidence in my database. I research and I collect a bunch of dates. I put them together in this section right here. So this is my records. This is how I track history, because in order to understand the context of things, you really kind of have to map it out and line it up and make sense of it. By the way, if there's any issue with my audio or anything, feel free to message me. I checked it and it seemed fine just before, but it was having some lag issues before that. Hopefully nothing like that is happening. But feel free to message and also ask questions or anything. I'll take anything and run with it. This is kind of an open research session. You just kind of hang out. It's the study hall, So I'm presenting a little bit, but as time goes on, I might talk a little less and do a little more. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But if I have any questions, I'll easily answer those. But in this database here, I have like these general breakups of time. So Stone Age, and that's a lot of time. As you can see here, first hominids migrating to Italy. So that's some of the first evidence that we have of hominids in Italy, which is just, Neanderthals, Homo erectus. I'm forgetting which particular one. I could write that down here and go research that. But anyway, the Pogiolo Mountains, right? So I'll cite a bunch of specific information that I just hear. It could be an article, I cross-reference whatever research. I put it in here and line it up, and then now when I take a map, I'm trying to actually figure out what was happening. And so one example right here of what's going on right there is, I believe, during the Golden Age, which is my word and Hesiod's word for the Neolithic, is, I should be able to find here somewhere. It should be around, so the Yangtzeans began cultivating wild rice in the Hong River. That's actually, it was already being cultivated actually in the upper Yangtze, but the Hong River in particular. So that Hong River is actually, I think, here. You can't see it on the map, but it's right there in between the Yellow and the Yangtze. So that's interesting. A little note. But I'm just trying to map those things out, right? So hold on, let me look here for where I'm getting this. It might be the Stone Age still in my category. Yeah, okay. So right here it says matriarchal / mitochondrial B Austronesians, split off from Australasians, and that there's a lot of different words. Australasian is kind of we don't know exactly. it could either refer to the first wave out of Africa, or it could refer to a later wave of Proto East Asian, essentially. But anyway, the Crawdai actually is this real name for that. I'll put a question mark there because we don't really have a name for that particular group, but as I said here, Crawdaian, it's kind of a little name. But really, it's the common ancestor between the two that they both split off from. And that common ancestor actually split off into Yangtzean and Austrasian as well. Right, so it's very, whoops, I got so many things up right here. I'm trying to, okay. It's very complex, but they migrate from China and Taiwan into the Philippine Islands. So in whatever research I was doing, I found evidence that the Philippine Islands were starting to get colonized or settled by these Austronesians. And then the data shows that that's when there was a split between the Taiwanese branch going off becoming Austronesian and the branch that was native to southern China kind of remaining and staying there, splitting off, becoming Crawdai groups. So yeah, so that was right here around just before, so this is like 12,000 BC. So that's why I have here as the Philippines and Taiwan having a separate group that we can call this, and then this group, right? If it was around 12,000 or 13,000 that I was mapping, I would probably show these two as the same group and give them whatever that proto name is, right? And so that's basically how I do it. That's a good example. But generally that's thought to be, when and where the Austronesians began to migrate via boat throughout Oceania, which is really interesting. 11,000 BC. At the same time as that's happening, some of the first farmers in West Asia are cultivating and farming, right? So we have to actually notice here that, yeah, there was a separate cultivation of foods between East Asia and West Asia, that they independently started cultivating things. Now, cultivation actually occurred for both of these cultures much earlier, like older than 20,000 years ago, right? The Kabarian culture is before the Natufians, and they actually invented the mortar and pestle, and we have evidence of them grinding things, seeds, thus implying that they were doing really early grain cultivation, or grain, at least wild grain stuff. So very interesting. And then I think the first pottery in the world was actually made by Yangtzeans in the upper Yangtze River, presumably working on wild rice, right, and starting to cultivate it. And I think that was somewhere around 30,000 or 20,000. I'm looking here. Here it is. Okay, yeah, it was around 20,000, 18,000 BC. First pottery in the world that we know of can be found in the caves of upper Yangtze River. Yep. So anyway, that's what I'm working on right now. That's a general overview. So I'm doing some research on when these groups came around, and I'm mapping it out. I got some tea. I'm ready to go. 11,000 BC. I think I'm in the way of my research again. Yeah, it doesn't, I'll just be over there. And I'll shrink a little bit there. Again, although I'm working on this map and it's anthropology and not everyone knows what's going on, feel free to ask about anything mythology related or whatnot. So yes, this is around the period when a culture that I refer to as the Taurians were building the Tastepeller sites, as they're called, in this upper Mesopotamia region, and also parts of southern Anatolia, which, like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, these some of the first big megalithic structures being built. Evidence of farming nearby, transition between hunter-gatherers and harvesters. Some researchers actually refer to this kind of blend as hunter-harvesters, just because they would go hunt during part of the season, and then they would go graze, or they would graze and hunt and shepherd during part of the season, being more mobile. And then during the other part of the season, the other half of the year, they would settle in the valleys and have semi-permanent places, or places they would come back to, and they would harvest grains and various fruit trees and all these other things. We talk about grains a lot, but really there's a lot more things that they eat. So this period right here, 11,000, is when some of those first sites start being built right here. And I'm also investigating it because we don't know exactly what groups were involved with this. We know that agriculture was being invented basically by the Natufians here in Canaan and the Jordan River Valley, and going all the way up to the Euphrates. One of the first farming villages that actually did sedentary farming in mass was Abu Huraira on the Euphrates River, and they are definitely an offshoot of Natufians. But some researchers find evidence of a slightly different industry or culture that starts to spread down into the Levant from somewhere in the north around those Göbekli sites, as though, or one particular evidence is, I think it's square housing. So the Natufians had like circular, spherical housing, and a lot of it blended with the environment, blended with caves and things, terracing and stuff. But this new industry was spreading down southward that was spreading kind of square housing units, and seems to correspond with some of the things that Tastepeller sites were being built like. So we don't know if that represents an ethnolinguistic difference, or if it's maybe just a technology that's being spread. But nonetheless, most evidence points towards the Natufians being a homeland of the Afro-Asiatic languages. There's other evidence for it being in Egypt, or even in the Maghreb over here, or even in Nubia. Is another really big growing hypothesis these days. For now, I'm going with the kind of conservative, I guess, the old explanation that it originated with them in the Middle East. But this other group that we don't have a name for is we don't quite have enough evidence about what was going on here in the transition between these Gravettian hunter-gatherers and the Anatolian Neolithic farmers that supposedly a lot of their genetics came from Anatolia, and spread farming throughout Europe and elsewhere. But we don't really have a name for that people. I call it Taurian because the Taurus Mountains are right here, and because Taurus bulls and cows were domesticated in this region from Oryx. This is where domestic cattle came from. That might have actually been part of the reason that they were somewhat distinct from the Natufians. They might have done a bit more shepherding of cows, and also more in this area sheep, and that might have spread down from there, but it's not entirely certain. So that's why we research. Yeah, the records show I don't usually find this on here, but let's see. Yeah, it is lining up with my It's like a range between there. It could be any of these times. So I always go with the oldest time whenever I'm told the time, just to be safe, just in case. And so this would align up with the time that sheep were domesticated, and that would have happened like around there. Native to Cyprus, interesting. Something that isn't quite talked about very much is this period when it comes to agriculture, or even civilization, because we're obsessed with civilization, and so we look at the Sumerians and say, oh, that's the oldest. But then there's an assumption on like less educated people, I guess, that they read into that and they say, oh, the Sumerians were the first farmers. No, they were much later, and the process of Sumer down here getting agriculture actually took a long time for these farming practices to start up in the upper Mesopotamia and move down to lower Mesopotamia. So no, this is actually more so up here, the cradle of civilization, the cradle of agriculture, so to speak. And so when we look at the pre-pottery Neolithic, then we get this map here, right? So this is the real cradle of agriculture. So basically what I'm mapping out is that right now, and this is a very late date that they're putting on there, right? But this might not correspond to a specific culture or ethnic or linguistic group. This could be as much as 3 or 4 different major hunter-gatherer lineages that came together and adopted agriculture in their particular regions. One might have been this Taurian group I said right here. That's one separate group. And the Natufian here would have been one group that was starting to innovate things and spreading out. They kind of came over here, spread into that region. And then another group over here, the Zarzians. I sometimes call them Zagrosians because the Zagros Mountains are right here. But we have a lot of ethnic research on cities like Shanidar and Ganjdera and such. These are indicating of an ethnic group that was distinct from those in here or here, and might relate all the way back to the Indus Valley or some other Caucasian groups, Caucasic groups, hunter-gatherers. But it's kind of a mystery. But yeah, at least 3 groups, maybe 4 if we consider the many hypotheses that talk about this region. Another fun thing about this map is I've been using generative fill to kind of customize it. Because another thing that isn't mapped very much is the changes in sea level and the different floods that would have occurred around this period. One such being the Persian Gulf. No one talks about this, despite it being arguably even more so than the Black Sea flood, which definitely happened. The Persian Gulf flood most certainly happened it definitely happened at some point between the Middle Ice Age, Stone Age, and the Neolithic. How late, though? My hypothesis, or from what I've been hearing, I think if I put a search in here, this is one. We know about Doggerland. And here, I think 8000 BC is, in the 8000s BC might be when I think the Persian Gulf deluge happened. And that became the basis for the myth of Sumerians and Dilmunians. This island here, Bahrain, became sacred. It was originally a mountain during this period, and then after the flood it became an island. It's a very small island. It should be here. I don't know why it's not. Hold on. Is my map weird and wrong? Okay. I'm looking up an actual map here. That's very strange indeed, yeah. Okay, let me look. You see this right here? See that little island right there? That's Bahrain. Okay. It's not really showing up on this map for whatever reason. The fun thing I can do is I can add it. Wait, why is it? Oh, did I cut it? Oh, whoops. Yeah, let's not cut it, let's copy it. And frankly, this island looks a little closer to its shape. Are we actually copying here? Looking at a map over here. Yeah, it's like vertical. Maybe a little smaller. No, I do not want to move that layer. Have so many layers. Okay. There, basically there. It was a sacred site for the Sumerians. And in the story of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh goes there to meet with Utnapishtim, who was Noah, the survivor of the flood. And he was immortal, and Gilgamesh wanted to learn immortality from him. He did not succeed, but that's why he went there. And that indicates that this region might have had a very particular connection to Bahrain and to the Persian Gulf in general. And another hypothesis, or another thing that was kind of assumed, is that the Garden of Eden was in the Persian Gulf here and was flooded. So, just saying. During this period, another thing that I will have to customize on here is probably showcase the humid Sahara, because it was greener and there was savanna over a lot of what is currently desert, even in Arabia as well. And there were some rivers. There was a really big river right here that was still around probably by this time. There was another one that was right here that fed into the Mesopotamia too. So there's just a whole lot of unknown stuff around Arabia out here, and most of the Sahara going all the way through it. Just what was going on there, it's not really researched enough. We haven't dug up enough sites, really. All right, so let me continue to do my additions here. Mm. All right, here in my last session, I didn't get to draw it, put it in the map yet, but I think I was looking at the branching off of this particular group here in North Africa. Kormusans. So they were from 40 to 16. Halfan industry basically followed them. Added Civilian and Kadan. So that right there lines up with 11,000. Mm-hmm. Yep. So wild grain agriculture during this period, 11,000s, would have basically already been happening. So by this period, I'm going to draw in a culture right here, call them Kormusans, even though they're a much later phase than the Kormusans. Kormusans is kind of just the most memorable term that we throw around. I might find a better term than them. There's a lot of hypotheses running around that they might have been the Proto-Nubians or Nilo-Saharans, which is an entire language family. And it might evolve into that eventually as we research here. Iranians, so I've mapped Iranians here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's use them as a reference. Upper Egypt. So this actually aligns with about the end. Oh no, that's before present. I always have to translate before present. That just means from now to the past. So if you're using BC, AD, or CE like I do, you have to always subtract 2,000 years because we're in the year 2000-ish. I get to subtract 2,000 years from whatever this BP number is. So this is actually 13,000 to 9,000. It's annoying because I constantly have to like make sure. There's a lot of people that actually just kind of say numbers, and it's very hard if you have different, if the numbers literally aren't the same thing. You know, you said 9,000 BC or 11,000 BP or 11,000 years ago, and people will be like, oh, 11,000 BC? It's like, no, actually that's 9,000 BC. So I hate that. I prefer to just go with BC and CE for people to know exactly what that time was. It's a little too relative, I think, to be before present, because before present is always going to be changing. In 100 or 1,000 years, the distortion there, I think, is a little too great. Let's put them here. All right, let me block this. Mm-hmm. So Upper Egypt is around. Let me see, where's the bend? That bend is down there. Down there, so it's the first curve. I'm gonna have to do this entire area, I think. Cut away the sea and some of the rivers too. You can kind of see the Nile going through. Came up with this technique to make it easier to draw these things very quickly. It also makes them look kind of cool. If you're a nerd like me, I guess. Oh. That's right. Just remembered I forgot to change the thumbnail on this video to be a map, so people would know that I'm doing maps. So now I think Iranian. Yeah, no. I think what we gotta do is cut out of the Iranians. Yeah. Oh, you're not gonna. Okay. Yeah. There. So they're most likely related to Iranians, or they definitely diverged from them. So in terms of color, I kind of just go, I take the other color and I move it along this way or that way. Could be a bit more mixed with the South as well. African, sub-Saharan African cultures, which the color scheme I have for that is yellow. That's also why some of these first groups, some of these yellow groups over here, this is the first wave out of Africa. Therefore, their, long story short, their genetics corresponds with some of the very oldest groups in Africa that still remain, which would be the San groups. There's some that still live in Sandawe, or the Sandawe that live in Tanzania, and then the Khoisan that live down in Namibian desert. During this period, I'm therefore presuming that there was a total continuity between those types of peoples living in all of South Africa before the Bantu groups came in. But yeah, I mean, I'm not specializing in any one group, so it's complicated because I have to look at the entire picture of human migrations. It's very fun. I love doing it. But it is complicated. Remove sounds there. Now I gotta put name. So these are officially, at this point, the first farmers in Egypt. The first agriculturalists in Egypt, and they have a lot of their technologies, including the grains that they get, the literal grains that they get, are native to the Levant. So most likely they are directly descended in some way from the Natufians, which that's why the hypothesis that Afro-Asiatic began with the Natufians makes sense, because this means the Egyptian languages, they're Afro-Asiatic, they're related to Semitic languages, for instance. Um, so yeah, it's kind of in line with that. But there's, again, hypotheses that say that there's a few cultures that actually are in this Nubian region before the Natufians, and some people hypothesize that these people in North Africa actually uh, mixed with or established the agricultural practices of the Natufians, like the really early ones, and that's why they're so ethnically different from these groups here, Eurasian type groups. Yeah, so Ethiopian languages and and Chadic languages, for instance, are Afro-Asiatic. Uh, so the debate, the controversy, so to speak, the debate these days is whether that was whether the Afro-Asiatic languages originated in Africa, somewhere around the Nile River, and spread up into Arabia to become the Semitic languages, or whether the Semitic languages are one of the oldest off branches of Proto-Afro-Asiatic up here, and with agricultural spreading, as agriculture spread, people spread out of the Middle East into Africa, establishing those languages. I am not entirely certain of one or the other. I'm actually leaning more towards the traditional explanation that agriculture and people spread out from the Middle East, from the Natufians, to establish and influence the languages of Ethiopia and Kushite or Cushitic, Chadic, other languages, because agriculture is a really big deal and it would spread rapidly. That's not to say there isn't mixing going on, of course. But yeah, it's interesting. Wondering why that looks the way it looks. It's really bumpy. The other ones aren't as, I guess it's the left side that's really bumpy because I have it's like a button. Huh. The beveling. It should be equal to everything, so yeah, I don't know. Okay. I'm scrolling here. Okay. It's weird. There's like an archaeological gap. It just kind of stops at 11,000, at 9,000 BC. East Africa. That's in South Africa. So if anyone knows where the link between the Khadan culture and either the later Nubian cultures, or the early Egyptian. So I guess for starters, I'm going to look for the early Egyptian cultures. And see where that began, where we can see a very clear lineage from early Egyptian to the Egyptian kingdoms and eventually empire, right? So we need to look at a few of these periods. That's very old. I'm looking more recent than that. Yep, Assyrians, which are presumably some of the oldest Homo sapiens to leave Africa. Not the oldest, but some of the oldest. We're talking about this group here. Okay, so this is interesting. Let me look at this. Don't know why it's not linked. Interesting. Okay, well, I have to look at another tab now, huh? This is how research works sometimes. Between 17,000 and 15,000 BC. So that aligns with the half-land. See, this is one of the things that just... This is another reason I'm doing what I'm doing, is there's so much disparate different disciplines and specializations. You know, people specialize in a specific culture or a specific area, and it's just like, okay, this Fukarian culture, as it's named by archaeologists, is referred to as a culture in Upper Egypt and Nubia between 17,000 and 15,000 BC, right? And there's another name for a culture in the same exact region in the same exact time, right? Between 20 and 14. So really the same. I'm not sure why they have a different name for it. So this is why I do this. This is why I have a database. So look at all these cultures. I basically say, okay, is there really is there a continuity here? Is there any real way to say that this culture is completely different, is a migration, or that it's just the same culture evolving over time, right? And so this is an example where it's like, okay, Fukarian, unless we find that there's something very distinctly different about it, that it might be an external group coming in or something else, I'm going to consider it to be the same as the half-land industry. And that's another thing, I guess, the difference between industry and culture, which is an industry is just like archaeological evidence of a different technique in, let's say, um, tool making or um, some other technological advancement. But as we know, as technology changes, it's not identical to culture or ethnicity or language. You can have, like, language can also be traded and be separate from ethnic background, and we can trade all times of technology and language without necessarily going anywhere. It could just naturally travel. So the fact that the Fukarian is a culture means sometimes a culture is a much smaller horizon, much smaller area. It might refer to like a few sites, but it's broadly within this Kormusan industry slash culture, right? So it's still useful to see these, but they all have to, it's useful to distinguish them from each other because of specific academic reasons, but when we are trying to actually look at who these people were, what their mythologies might have been, and we're trying to reconstruct or just construct an understanding of them and the context, we have to kind of bring these all together and look at them at the big picture. Okay, let me see here. Is that working? Mm. So these are a bunch of culture names for specific, usually sites. Um, I see right here, Wadi Kabanaya. That's one of these cultures, right? Kabanaya, and that's really just a site. That's a particular location, effectively a settlement or a city. And we treat it as a distinct culture, even though it's similar to these cultures surrounding it, these sites or cities or settlements around it. And so that indicates that there's maybe a larger culture that we can call a culture. Um, I'm calling it Kormusan right now. And essentially the way I'm thinking of it is Kormusan 1 is Kormusan proper, as they call it, archaeologists call it. Kormusan 2 is Halfland and Kubnayan, Fukarian, all these other groups. Right, so I can put these in here just in case they come up again. Sicilian culture, Achaean culture, no human can remember all these things, And this is where I'm probably going to list. And maybe looking at every individual one, we'll find that there's actual distinguishment. But for now, I'm going to treat them as related. So Wadi Halfa, that's where the namesake of Halfland comes from. Right. $30,000. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Pardon me if this is very boring, but you know, it's chill. You know, we're chilling out, we're doing some research. I'm reading, you can read along, you could do your own reading, you can ask a question and have me go in an entirely different direction. So far, I'm getting the distinct impression that either I'm not tagging the video correctly, or um, Saturday's not a good time, or something else. I don't know. Tell me, give me feedback. Feel free. Sibylian. 13 to 10. So this is the range of my map right now. This happens a lot in archaeology too. Vanished. They say vanished. When you're basing it on an industry, like just a bunch of evidence that people were there using a particular kind of style, it's a little weird to say vanished. It could just be that they moved. It could be that they were assimilated. It could be that they changed the way they did things. Vanished isn't really the best idea. Be right back. Cat's asking. Do you need to go? You go. Bye. Bye. The cat gets to come in and out as he pleases. Gathering grains, yep. So it was kind of like a wild agriculture, but it was very much bridging, just like the Natufians, into organized sedentary lifestyle. And they say this as well, domesticated seeds were not found. And domesticated seeds are like, there's very complicated indications of whether it's domesticated. Usually it's because it's a very specific strand, a genetic strand. But the other thing is that wild grains and wild foods of various kinds, for instance, grasses like wheat and whatnot, the wild version of them seems to have been quite widespread in the Middle East and even in parts of Europe, even during Mesolithic, hunter-gatherer times. And they might have spread naturally over thousands of years, or they could have been something that was just kind of naturally moved or followed humans. Humans just carried them around. Even though it wasn't organized agriculture, they could have still valued it. They could have spread it around accidentally or intentionally, just to have as an extra food source around. It doesn't mean that they would sit there and they would just eat it, but that they would, have various things that they were eating and cultivating and kind of throwing around and gathering here and there. So it's very interesting. And yeah, there's some evidence of warfare, or it looked like organized conflict between tribes going on at this particular time. And that's interesting because if they started to be more sedentary, that would explain why certain resources might have been, certain resources and tribes might have been more valued than others, or maybe raiders would come in to try to harvest the resource from. Let's say the raiders are more hunter-gatherers. They come throughout one of the seasons to settle in the valleys, but there's people living there, right? People with bows and arrows, or maybe the hunters have bows and arrows because they were also developed within a few thousand years of this time. It could be that led to all kinds of skirmishes because the hunter-gatherers thought like they don't have a sense of land or sedentary ownership, and they might be going wherever they wanted to go from season to season. And it could be that as climate changed, which is also indicative in this time that the Sahara Desert was desertifying a little bit more, as some of these pristine areas around the Nile River would have been more valuable, more people would be settling there and competing over resources, and the ones that were more sedentary would come into conflict with other sedentary ones and also ones that weren't, that were just coming there seasonally. So yeah, warfare might have began as kind of raiding these farmer villages in order to get the resources that they they're grasshoppers, they're collecting resources over long scales of time. They think they could just get a quick buck, so to speak. 13 to 9. Still within our period, as I show right here. Sibylian and Kadan at the same time. Mm-hmm. Just like permaculture here, various plant life put together. Permaculture as opposed to monoculture or agriculture is kind of just having a bunch of different various foods all together in a food forest of sorts, growing here and there and together in order to create a variety of foods to harvest throughout the seasons, right? And that's how agriculture likely developed, is permaculture. And permaculture is very indistinct from what looks like nature, right? It looks natural. There's some evidence even in the Amazon Valley, the Amazonian rainforest, that a lot of more edible trees and plants and foods might have been planted in mass over thousands of years by hunter-gatherers who just took foods that they liked and they'd spread it throughout the forest. And they created a natural food forest in the Amazon that they could just get whatever they need. And there's a lot of evidence that perhaps this is how a lot of hunter-gatherers actually set up the world that they lived in. They didn't just go here and there and let nature take its course. They actually took resources and they kind of did what we would call agriculture in a much less organized, orderly fashion for possibly millions of years, right? And I kind of, I'm more interested, I'm interested in that. I think it makes sense. Mm-hmm. So sickles and grinding stones, very clearly indicative of grain being used and processed in some manner. Mm. A very old race theory going on here. So there's a lot of information being thrown around in here. None of it quite cohesive enough to me to explain. In general, it's saying that there was a very diverse set of people coming together in the Nile River, and I think that's quite certain, because we know that there were hunter-gatherers throughout the Sahara during this time, and it seems to be that these are proto-Nilo-Saharan peoples, and that would be definitely a sub-Saharan ethnic group, more so than a Eurasiatic ethnic group. And the main indication of the difference there would be Cro-Magnon, like they were saying, which really just means mixing with Neanderthals, because Neanderthals did not live in Africa. They evolved up here in Europe and Asia and into the Altaic Mountains and such. So if we see a genetic, if we see a lot of Cro-Magnon in the DNA of a particular group, then that indicates that they are descended or mixed to some degree with people who lived in Eurasia and not people who lived primarily in Africa. And so, yeah, that's what this study is kind of looking at. As dated as it is, there's a few updated perspectives on it. But generally it's showing that there was a mixing going on, and that a good amount came from here into the valley, a good amount came from the Sahara into the valley, a good amount came from, upriver down in sub-Saharan Africa, and then a good amount from over here, North Africa. They said Mediterranean, which might have been really what they mean is the Oranians, the North African groups, hunter-gatherers that were living at that time in this area. Okay, so here we go. Fayum is an interesting period. Let's see if it lines up. One second. Kitty cat. Are you just gonna go in and out? Is that what you do? Just in and out, in and out. Oh, precious. This is a rascal. Right here. Taters. Okay. So what this is saying here, and these are, again, very dated terms, but I think when we're looking at archaeology, even old archaeology, we can't deny the existence of ethnic connections and genetics, you know, when we're doing actual genetic research. So they are alluding to something, even if they didn't quite understand how genetics works. This category here, mectoid, is something that corresponds to what they say Paleo-Berber. It wasn't specifically the Berber peoples, it was the Mesolithic hunter-gathering people who lived in northern Africa, and in particular a lot of their practices were in the Maghreb here that originated some of the microlithic and other industries, and they spread across here, spreading their industry across. These are Iranians. That's the word I prefer to use for them. It's a cultural industry term, and they're distinct from the Capsians that came later. The Capsian culture would be effectively the Neolithic Natufian agricultural influence, particularly shepherd influence that went into North Africa, and that became the Berber culture, because the Berbers are also Afro-Asiatic language people, ethnic group. So this is before 11,000 BC, is before those shepherds, Berbers, started spreading in and mixing with other people in North Africa. So yeah, a lot of these dates here, I'm looking right now at the window of 11,000 BC. So if that's happening around 6,000-ish, it looks like, then that's not what I'm mapping right now. Yep. And they call this the Fayum Neolithic because the Fayum, which is this lake here, and there's like a few kind of, it's a swampy area. It's very nicely livable. It's one of the first places where large-scale agriculture started to happen in Egypt, and that is most certainly derivative of a northern influence from the Tufians and Afro-Asiatic. So that's likely where the actual Egyptian language kind of came from, is around Fayum and Lower Egypt, around there. Now, we don't know. We don't know. Maybe it did originate around here with the Comorusans. Or maybe the Comorusans influenced the Natufians or their predecessors. Right now I'm just trying to map what we're seeing and what that tells us about the current period. All right. So Iranians, another name for them is Ibero-Maurutian. Yes, from 23 to 9,000. Got a notification. Okay. So this is another group I want to look at. Looks like they are also in my 11,000 window. Yep. Let's see. So this is a group of Iranians that came from North Africa and then started mixing with Natufians during this period. There's a hypothesis that they started some of the, or at least influenced some of the farming agricultural mortar and pestle practices. But there's indication of early agricultural activity by the Natufians indigenously before this group, Mushabians, came in. So I'm of the opinion that the Mushabians just kind of came in, adopted practices, mixed with them, and then spread maybe some microlithic Stone Age technology. So basically Iranians interfacing with Natufians. So there might actually be a need to add this Mushabian term to this region here. Let's see if that would help kind of show the nuance and complexity of the situation. So let's look at the Mushabian culture. Yep. Mm. Do I have a Xenian? Interesting. This says derives from. Oops. Oh, wow. So this is, I think, yeah, southern region. Okay, so this is why I'm getting caught up on this word is the same region is referring to another culture that is later potentially Canaanite culture in the region. There was 3 of them that were around Canaan, and this particular one around Sinai and the desert, Nizinim desert that was mentioned. It just indicates that maybe these Mushapians interacted or influenced the genetics or otherwise of that particular region much later. That's why I just put question marks here. You know, if I have a possible note. Oops, don't click that. All right. Are we still at the Kabarian culture? Can we go back? I don't know why it's not going back. Weird. All right, so Yes, that they're a mix of Kabarian, which is pre-Natufian. So that's like it's either like the hunter-gatherer phase of Natufians, but they were also developing very early wild grain cultivation or wild grain harvesting. So I don't differentiate them much from the Natufians. They're basically just the um, Mesolithic Natufians, before they really started to become sedentary. Even though, again, there's evidence of the Kibarians actually being semi-sedentary, just like the Natufians. So, again, there's not really much distinction in my mind between those two cultures. Which effectively, to me, means if we go to Kibarian, Kibarian, I put I's in everything because I guess I have a Roman bias. But Latinization bias. But here you see it goes to 21,000 BC to 13,000 BC. So that it goes into the 20,000s very far, like 10,000 years before the Natufians. But they really are the Natufians. Because they go right back in 13,000 BC directly into the Natufian phase. So yeah, I don't distinguish. I don't know why it's okay. There we go. Finally, the back button works. Shabian, yep, they're right in there. And where are they present? Interior southern Levant, Sinai. Mm-hmm. I don't know about Wikipedia. Again, I'm using it because in these sessions it's easier to kind of put in here to make it visible. But of course, these are publicly kind of freely compiled. I don't have a problem with Wikipedia like other academics do. I think it's a good starting place. And I think if you're not trying to get too deep on any one thing at the moment, then you can kind of glance and make notes about it and then go deeper into it with some of these sources and then other search engines when you really need to make sense of something. Right now, it seems that generally for the sake of the depth of my research and the breadth that I need to get to, it seems that they are just like kind of a horizon of mixture between Oranian and Natufian. So for the sake of my map, a lot of them are referring to this Sinai region and this southern area here. So I'm just going to kind of draw that in and be content with that. That's right, Mushabian. Yep. All right, so they are cut out from there. And I would like to cut, since they're mixed, I would like to cut a little bit out from here. else. I'm gonna have to reorganize my list in here eventually because it's just there's so many cultures on here from around the world. Natufians. Yeah, let's cut them out and then Iranians. Let's cut them out. There. Now there's a nice little slice. You can see there's a piece here on the other landmass, Arabia here, that I cannot say with confidence, so I'm going to cut that out. Man, I can't draw. Cannot draw. Yeah, I'll leave it. No big deal. Alright, so that one. Again, probably very similar to Iranians. Layer style, yep. Okay. Oops. Don't want to change the color too much. But with a little bit northerly influence, so I'll put them a little more blue on the spectrum. Blue is the direction of Eurasian. So yellow is African. Like really not much different, not much variation here. Slightly more towards the Iranian color. Oh, and I think I know what I did wrong here with the Cormusens, actually. Clear that, copy paste. Yeah, okay. A little bit more yellow. Okay, that explains why it was a big bump before and now it's not. Doesn't explain why it's not a bump on this line though. Huh. Okay. Do I need a double bevel and emboss? I'm not sure. Oh, I think I know what's going on. Okay, that's not really my intention. It's kind of globbing them all together and not separating them from one another. So I have to individually make them all bevel. Annoying. See, that's, now you can distinguish. Much easier. Oops, do not do that. If you haven't noticed, I'm using Photoshop. That's because it's a lot easier to edit than a lot of GIS mapping programs, to be frank. And I don't need like super intense data because these maps are just made to be JPEGs, basically. So, yeah. There, that's way more easy to read. Mm-hmm. So that emphasizes the boundaries a bit more. And it looks nice. Oops. Yep. Okay, Magdalenians. That's another group here. That's another group people know about the Magdalenians. They were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers in Europe, Western Europe in particular. They really are just a branch off of the Gravettians in general, which overall is just Mesolithic hunter-gatherers that fled to southern Europe during the last glacial period. And by 11,000, the glacial maximum, I think, has already been reached. And now the glaciers are retreating. So these hunter-gatherers here are actually following caribou and other stuff, or other animals, and mammoths as well, out of southern Europe, because also the animals, they fled to southern Europe, and so there's a giant population of large animals to hunt in southern Europe, packed in with all the people, and so there's a huge population explosion and bottleneck in southern Europe, especially Western Europe and Spain and South France, that developed a specific hunting culture. Like we literally saw them using less flint and more bone to make things, right? So that indicates that they're very much more hunting very regularly. And then they followed the animals all the way up, and that also indicates the Magdalenians might have been the ancestors of many Finno-Ugric peoples who eventually followed reindeer and caribou up into this region. And the Sami would be one of the oldest groups of that expansion. But that's a hypothesis. There's a lot of question about Western versus Eastern hunter-gatherer and what that means genetically, what the differences might have been. So we don't know if that came from here or they came from here. I try to find out. I don't know why it's not working. Oh. I think Photoshop is trying to crash on me right now. Okay. Save. Save often. Oh no. Crossing my fingers. I think right now my whole computer is having a fun time. Ooh. Wait, what's going on? I don't know what's going on right now. My whole computer is lagging. Technical difficulties, BRB. closing a few appliances. Okay. Pardon me, it's still being slow. I'm not even sure if I'm live right now. I think so. Deleted video, okay. Strange. It won't even try to open a menu. I don't understand. All right, well, thank you for joining me, if you had joined me at all. I'm gonna have to deal with this issue. I will be live again next week with a mythology topic. If you have any questions or any ideas for what you want the topic to be, about mythology, about comparative matters, about anthropology, whatever it might be, I'll be doing a stream at 1 p.m. Eastern Time next Sunday. That's the plan. I'm not going to do Saturdays anymore. It seems like, yeah, maybe not working out. But if you enjoyed it, please leave a like so that maybe for you can see these kinds of videos and get them in time and ask the questions you want to ask or look into things you want to look into. Basically, my computer just decided to start lagging. Oh wow! Look at right when I was about to close down, it stopped lagging. Interesting. I guess I just needed to talk more or something. I'm not sure what that is, but yes. All right, well, I mean, I saved it, so okay, maybe I'll go on for another 30 minutes to make it a full hour. See if anyone else wants to come and ask questions. Again, it's a free study hour. It's chill. I'll do whatever I need to do. But yeah, I decided to do this today. There's a bit of a gap there. No, not really. Yeah, seems fine. Now that I saved, I'm going to fix some of these now too. Another interesting note people don't know about this region and the East Asian Neolithic is there are two main East Asian species of rice. There is Japonica. It's called Japonica because we named it after Japan, despite the fact that it is really just East Asian. It was originating in the Yangtze Valley in the upper Yangtze. That's one species of domesticated rice, Japonica. And the other one is Indica, which was cultivated here, originally here in the Brahmaputra and Ganges Delta in Bangladesh region. And studies are finding that it could be that both are actually related to one another, to a common ancestor of wild rice that might have been cultivated somewhere in between them, possibly the Mekong River Valley in northern Vietnam, So the place that's right in between all these different cultures kind of coming together. Yes, so that's actually an interesting note about this is when we look at the distribution of Hmong and Mian languages, we find an interesting pattern. I'm actually going to change topics a bit from Egypt because I think we found the answer there. And let's go to these languages. So here's the remnants. This is what is still existing today of these language families. Right. So let me think. This one's a little simpler. So Mongolic and Mianic. And these are considered to be mountain languages in China. The main language of China today, which is Mandarin, is derived actually from a Sino-Tibetan language, and that originated, that particular language of Sinitic or Han Chinese or Mandarin came from the Yellow River Valley, upper Yellow River Valley around here. I haven't even mapped that here in this picture yet because they did not actually, they weren't the first to domesticate rice. Whoever was seems to be the ancestors of native Yangtze people, which today we would probably refer to as the Hmong-Mian languages. They're in the mountains and the highlands because they've been pushed out to the mountains and highlands by the incoming northern Han Chinese groups. It is widely understood that southern China was a homeland for many different languages in Indochina more generally. So southern China was very linguistically diverse before the Han Chinese kind of imperial takeover. So there's essentially a similar thing that happened in East Asia with Sino-Tibetan languages as what happened in West Asia with Indo-European languages much later. So yeah, they kind of conquer and take over and replaced a lot of things. Nonetheless, here we have it. So we see here, the Mekong River is up here in Vietnam. If that's where wild rice was first cultivated in this region and domesticated and then split into different types, one going across the mountain of Burma over there to India and the other going to southern China and the Yangtze River, then we do have an indication of these Yangtzean languages still having remnants in this area. Right. It might indicate that I drew this wrong. I might have drawn this line wrong. It could be the Yangtzean actually goes all the way to here, right? And that Kra Dai actually is a little closer to this region. But before we can say that confidently, we have to kind of look up, compare. Might as well make a new tab here, actually. Let's just duplicate that. Alright, so here we have a huge influence. Thailand, as it's called today, is actually originally inhabited by Austroasiatic families, namely Khmeric languages, like Cambodia today, Vietic, which is the basis of a lot of Vietnamese, despite the fact that northern Vietnam is distinct or different. There's a lot of Hmong that live in northern Vietnam. That is right there, Hmong Mien. So that's the distinction. We say Vietnamese. Vietnamese also has a lot of Chinese, Han, Mandarin influence because they were kind of mixed eventually over time. But it's interesting. So the Thai groups actually migrated from here down into this valley here much later in history. So this whole yellow colored here is actually probably migrating from this region. We can see elements of them very deep into southern China, more in the highlands and the Yangtze River Valley and such, and then they do seem to be quite populous in these regions. There's a big remnant on the island here, which is very interesting because, yeah, I mean, the general hypothesis is that the Thai people were actually the common ancestors of Thai and Austronesian people, so Austronesian being starting in Taiwan, moving out to the many islands. The hypothesis is that they both lived here, but as you can see, there's no real remnants there anymore because Han and Cantonese is a version of kind of mixing with a lot of those languages, and Han Chinese Mandarin. That's a lot of this region now. Taiwan to this day has way more Han Chinese influenced mixed people than it does original indigenous Melanesian or Austronesian inhabitants, right? So it's hard to see, it's hard to know, but this would almost indicate that that these proto-Thai were on this island and maybe a few of these things, and they branched off in a different direction, or they came from here to there. But yeah, another thing that we don't know for sure. Comparing these two maps, we definitely see some cohabitation in this region, right? That they too were likely split off into two different directions. So yeah, I don't know. I can definitely see here. But the note about domestication of rice, that's very fascinating to me. Makes me wonder if it might not be useful, therefore, to expand this region a bit into the Mekong area. Let's do a little bit more than that, actually. Let's go there. Yanxians, yep. Wait, what? Oh, okay. A lot of people don't also know about the Austroasiatic family, which would be Khmer, but also there's Khamasian and other groups that are actually in India. The remnants are in India, Eastern India in particular. Again, further implying that spread of wild rice into Indican variant. And so yes, there's a big question there with all these different ethnic groups generally. Did they have a common ancestor before this period, 11,000 BC, that split off from this area and went everywhere here? You know, this general Australasian group within Indochina and southern China as very distinct from other groups, right? How far into India did they go as well? That's a good question. One indication of just how widespread agriculture was, both east and west influencing each other, would be that eventually China began cultivating grains that they traded from Central Asia that ultimately came from the Middle East. They also got their hands on cattle or cows from the Middle East pretty early on in history, like 6,000 BC and so on. So there were vast trade networks going all the way to China from the Middle East, from where ultimately around 10,000 BC is when cattle were domesticated. In a few thousand years, they were already in China. And they're also probably already in South Africa as well. You have the Maasai culture today and the Nilotic culture in Africa that cattle is very important to their lifestyle. They would have potentially originated their practices, their cattle grazing practices, nomadic practices might have originated from the Neolithic, from trading with the Nile to get cattle. Another weird, interesting domestication story would be chickens, which are native to China. And so every myth that we have about chickens in the West, like say the Gnostics, you're going to know Abraxas, this Egyptian Ptolemaic Greek, basically the first man, created all things. Sometimes it's female. It's really androgynous, actually. There are even Yoruba. There's a Yoruba rooster and hen that help create the universe. All of those myths would not exist without having very long distance trade, ultimately of chicken that came from China. So it's very fascinating. Whenever you see any kind of rooster or chicken symbology, it's possible that those myths have roots in China, or otherwise that, just the agriculture practice itself of raising chickens is somehow influential, right? The Austronesians also had chicken, right? So if they're starting to spread into Polynesia and such right now, is it that right now by 10,000, 11,000 BC, they already had chickens, they already had that kind of agriculture and were using it on these islands, right? I think most likely, I think they were very early on agricultural. It's very, very interesting. So, yeah. So that's interesting, that's possible. Again, because it's just those groups being around that area, and that being the most likely origin of wild rice, or of the particular varieties of rice that they used. Another thing not talked about very much are, Melanesians in general. We have the Andaman Islands here. So that's the islands that comes up in the news when some pastors try to Christianize them and they get killed by going to the island to get caught. These islands here are the Andaman Islands right there. And that's they are essentially one of the oldest remnant populations of the first Homo sapiens out of Africa, and they followed the Indian Ocean all the way to Australia. So they are related to the Aboriginal Australians, and also to the Papua New Guineans, or the Papuans. Various cultures in here. They had their own agricultural revolution, by the way, around around bananas and their variants, and other foods like coconuts and such. Actually, in New Guinea, in Papua, this island here. So at this time, 11,000 BC, you can see a little bit of them here. There are certain Melanesian or Melanesian adjacent related groups that live throughout Indonesia and even the southern Philippines that still have genetic markers related to the Andaman and Papuans and Aboriginal Australians. And then they were mixed in, assimilated with Austronesian populations, right? So at this point in history, this snapshot right now, it's when they still lived here, and were not yet mixed with Austronesians. Let's look at another case. Let me put this bevel and abyss, embed, emboss, I guess. All right, seems good. All right, let me put a name to this one. I mean, this right here also makes me wonder about the hypothesis that Afroasiatic might actually originate more from the Iranians, therefore from the Mushabians, a very specific mix between Natufian agriculturalists and Iranian hunter-gatherers. If Afro-Asiatic languages originated from Mushabians, that would explain why they had such a significant influence over African languages during the Neolithic, and also Arabian, because they're kind of right there. It's available. And it would explain the evidence I mentioned earlier, where there seems to be an indication of northerly influence in the Levant after the Natufians, which might indicate that the Mushabians kind of took on more of a shepherd and hunter-gatherer mixed lifestyle, and then eventually migrated up and influenced and changed history in this region. Basically because in the records, a lot of Semitic peoples, like the Assyrians earlier than that, like the Aramaeans who became Babylonians, really the Hebrews in general as well, and the Hyksos dynasty as well in Egypt much later, presumably a Canaanite dynasty of pharaohs. They're all referred to as shepherd mercenaries, shepherd kings, shepherds, and there was a lot of correlation between being nomadic shepherds and also warriors and mercenaries. Even the Akkadian Empire, the first empire in history, the Sumerians were separate from the Akkadians. The Akkadians were a Semitic people from the Levant, and they were hired. They were a lot of them were enslaved. Akkad himself was enslaved by a Sumerian king as his cupbearer. He eventually rebelled against him, but many of them were fought as mercenaries against the Elamites, which were a separate group, probably related to the Zarzians here, and also to the Dravidians in Indus Valley civilization. The Elamites, that is, would have been related to them. The Sumerians were fighting them, and they hired a lot of Semitic Akkadian warriors to fight for them. And eventually that kind of backfired because then the mercenaries kind of took over, flipped everything else on its head, and then boom. And that might have happened a lot here. And that possibly is starting to, it makes sense to me that perhaps the Afroasiatic languages, particularly Semitic languages, were the language of shepherds and warriors and mercenaries who eventually kind of flipped the hierarchy on its head and took over in a lot of the region here. That would explain why some of the genetic and linguistic differences with Eurasian groups might be slightly distinct from Semitic and Afroasiatic groups who tended towards doing more shepherdry, a little bit less farming. You know, and that's interesting mythologically speaking, because then we can go back to, you know, you can look at old Abrahamic religions and such, and there's always this distinction of shepherdry is good, is the preferable lifestyle, is the holy lifestyle, whereas farming is not, it's bad. You know, the Sumerians are looked at as like Babylon, you know, it's thought of as this sinful, different place from themselves. It's interesting. It's possible. It's possible. Oops. I gotta put the Persian Gulf flood. There we go. Just makes me wonder, like, who lived here? Because this would have been pristine land to hunt and gather along the river. This lowlands, probably very swampy, very wet. Like the whole Mesopotamia at this point. Who was living there and hunting there? It's very curious to me because they weren't doing agriculture yet. Not really until the Sumerians that we know of. Could they have been related to the Zarzians here? Or was there an entirely different group of people living in the Arabian Peninsula during this time? Right? It's very interesting, and frankly, like, I try to do research, I can't actually find that information just yet. If I were to look up Mesolithic Arabia, let's look there. What do we get? No, I don't want to know about the Near East in general. Might want to learn about the Indian Mesolithic. That would be very useful because it could relate. What's this here? Al-Magar, Neolithic. It's in Arabia. Around 9000 BC. So they did agriculture and animal husbandry when it wasn't a desert yet, so it was still kind of a savanna in this region. And up in the mountains in there probably would have been pretty nice, pretty green. What what? What is this? I've never heard that hypothesis in my life. The hypothesis that horses were domesticated 9,000 years ago in Arabia? I didn't even know that wild horses were hunted in Arabia. Let's see this. Source. What is this? Hmm. 'Ostriches. Yeah, ostriches used to live in Arabia, and I think India as well. There were, just like how lions used to live in Europe and such, like a lot of these African large animals that are thought to be African actually lived in a lot of these regions. And you got to remember, of course, when Homo sapiens entered the Eurasia largely, there were already other hominids there for millions of years, or hundreds of thousands of years. So, like, Neanderthals were there, but also Homo erectus was there in a lot of those regions that they would replace. In Asia, there were tons and tons of Denisovans and other groups. So we're talking about co-evolution with other large animals like ostriches and lions and such that would have extended far past Africa, out of Africa. So this is incredibly interesting. Tangent here. Years from now, they said. Is that... That's not properly cited then. See? 9,000 years from now, that from now means BP, so that would be 7,000. So I'm not sure where they're getting this information. Maybe from some other source. These wild horses are just blowing my mind here. How did they date this? How did they properly date this statue they found? Because if it's shown as being domesticated, you know, having actual, as they say, um, basically mouth guards and shit. Like a muzzle. So there's, so I'm not entirely convinced of all this. Obviously, I'm gonna have to go do some research and look into how they're able to date these things and make these conclusions. But this would be very interesting, to say the least, if there was some form even of wild horse in Arabia, let alone any kind of domestication, any kind of just riding of the horse at all. Because even in the steppe, where we think around 6,000, as it said, BC, or later than that, even the domestication of the horse by presumably Indo-Europeans in the Eurasian steppe, even then, we only have evidence that they basically used wagons and chariots for them, not directly riding them. Although um, it's possible to ride a horseback, right? And you don't necessarily need a saddle. You don't need all these things. It is possible to ride a big animal, like of any kind. It's possible, but whether it was done in mass or regularly, or whether they were being, you know, they were cowboys essentially riding them very effectively, or using them for warfare at all. I mean, my belief is that cattle or horses, that is, weren't used for warfare until basically the Scythians started using them for bows. It was actually archery on horse that was the first use of them in warfare, because war horses need a long time to be bred for war and to not be scared and to actually be able to run at enemies, or to be, you know, to have a heavy guy holding a spear or a sword or what have you and running up to other horses or to people. It would have taken some time for that to develop, and it would have certainly taken time to get saddles and everything, and ways of holding on to a horse to effectively use it militarily, stirrups and such. But I think even stirrups and all that had more to do with the innovation of bow cavalry, and that would have been used very practically as for hunting. Hunting animals on horseback with a bow would have been incredibly useful, clearly, in the steppe. And I think that's part of why it was so powerful. And of course, the Scythians were able to basically conquer a lot of land, or at least raid a lot of people when they finally did that. But that's not until the Iron Age, which is much, much later than 6,000 BC, like they're saying, or whatever dates they're saying for horseback riding or taming of any kind in Arabia. But yeah, I'll have to look into that. My time's up now. Feel free to leave some comments on this video if you thought it was interesting, if you have suggestions of what else you think I should be doing. Pardon me if it was boring, or if it was lengthy, or I didn't talk enough. It's like, well, if I want to do research, I'm going to have to quietly think sometimes, you know. I have to process the information. But of course, you know, if you liked this after the fact, then like the video, help me out, and then plan to come to the next live stream. And even if you just want to sit around, hang out with me while I do this study, I would appreciate the company. So yeah, thanks for watching. Why don't you go off and research on your own about some of these interesting hypotheses that are coming up. I'm gonna go research a little bit more of it, a little more deeply. So I'll be back next week. And my next edited video will probably be coming out soon too. Trying to figure out what it is.